Every day there is a forgetting, and every moment there is the possibility of remembering. Remembering who you truly are, awakening to your body, to the inner world and experience of being alive. Here is where you find the beauty, the joy. Here is where you free your soma. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Free Your Soma, Stories of Somatic Awakening and How to Live from the Inside Out. I have a special guest with me today. She is a friend of mine from the past that I met when I lived in Norway, and I'm so excited to share her journey and her work today. Her name is Maja Grythe. She's an embodiment coach, a shadow worker, and a yoga teacher. She's passionate about guiding others on what spirituality truly is and on what being human is really about. Her work centers around understanding shadows and helping others integrate and become whole. She found yoga, meditation, and breathwork, and it saved her life. I can totally relate to that. But now her practices center around shifting her shadow consciousness and transmuting patterns and traumas into a vision of a larger truth, which is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about a larger truth of what being human really is, that encapsulates the things that we sometimes don't want to look at, that we don't want to talk about, right? That are uncomfortable or even maybe boring, or that we don't really want to go near. We often are very adapted to trying to go always towards the light and always towards what feels good, right? But that can become its own trap. So I'm so excited to share this conversation with you today and hear, a little deeper about all these subjects that are so exciting. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Wonderful. Yes. And, for our listeners who maybe some of them are familiar with shadow work, some of them are maybe, not so familiar, can you give us kind of your background as it relates to kind of the shadows that came up in your life to be faced?
hmm Yes, so as you were saying, and thank you for that beautiful introduction, by the way. As you were saying, I found yoga when I was pretty young. I was 19, 20. I had chronic anxiety, but I didn't really know it at the time. I thought that was the state of being that was normal. So I didn't really have any grown-ups, I say that in like air quotes, around me or anyone to help me understand my experience of the world. I'm an intuitive, I'm extremely sensitive. I didn't know any of that stuff at that time. I didn't understand that I kept picking up on other people's feelings and energies all the time, constantly. I had no way of like protecting my own energy field at all. So I thought that all of that chaos was just me. That was just my world. But I found yoga and I started doing it mainly to stretch my body. That was my kind of ticket in because I was in ballet school at the time and I wanted to do something to stretch. And then I remember very well my first experience in a yoga class. This was an Ashtanga yoga class. And it was the breath. It was the breath that just opened up some space inside of me. And I remember I started crying. I didn't know why, but I cried basically for the whole class. It was like 1.5 hour class. And the teacher, she was so compassionate but also kind of strict, when people are strict in that compassionate way. And she came over to me and she just sat next to my mat and she was like, just keep going. Just keep going. Do everything I say. Just keep going. Let the tears come. So I did. And after that experience, I remember afterwards, I felt like just lighter. My chest felt lighter. Everything in my body felt different. And I was like, okay, I'm going to keep doing this. I don't know what this was, but this is it somehow. And then that's how basically my yoga journey started. And then I got introduced to more breath work and also meditation, and I started doing that. So that's why I say that yoga saved my life, because otherwise I would have gone into some, you know, journey on medication probably. At some point I would have noticed that okay, I have anxiety and I'm very happy that I didn't have to go down that road. And yeah, I did yoga or I still do yoga. Like that's just a integrated part of my life now. But I actually made a career out of it. I became a yoga teacher, and then I joined as a business partner in a yoga studio in Oslo, which is where you and I met actually. And I did that for years. I took over as the owner eventually, and I ran that for years. And what started to happen is that, how yoga and a lot of New Age spirituality, and when I say yoga, I mean the way that yoga is presented mostly in the Western world today.
Mm.
And you mentioned it, this focus on following the light, love and light, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. We have to integrate and connect to the light, absolutely. But for me personally, what I noticed is that I kept doing this practice, I kept meditating, I kept doing all the things, but I was still moving in the same patterns. I was still having the same limiting beliefs. I was still making the same kind of bad choices for myself. And all of the same challenges, kept popping up. And I was like, why? What is it that I'm not doing? And that's when, how the universe has a tendency to, like, when somehow you go through something and it's almost like an initiation. And
Mm.
then
Oh,
all of
yeah.
a sudden you're ready for some new information. And it felt like that. It felt like the universe was like, okay, you just asked the right question. Here you go. And then I got introduced to shadow work, this whole concept. And so what shadow work is, sorry, that was a long explanation, but to answer
Yeah.
your question, the way that I see it is that shadow work is kind of an umbrella. There's many, just like yoga or spirituality, there's many tools and many paths to choose. Shadow work is basically the ability to face ourselves truthfully and to look at not just the light, not just the parts of us that we like, but to the ability to face every part of us and to look at the parts of us that we may not like, the things that scare us, and to integrate it. It's all about understanding and integration because this is how we become whole. And
Mm.
this is also how we, if we're looking to create change in our lives, 95% of who we are is run by the subconscious mind. So it doesn't really matter how consciously clear we are about what we want and where we want to go if we have no idea what's running the show from behind the scenes, kind of. So shadow work, and within that, there's also trauma work. It's a huge part of it and a very important part of it. It is to start to understand what is actually operating in your subconscious mind to get access to that because it's the only place from where we can actually start to create real change.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so much of what you've described I can relate to. And, the interesting thing is, also around the age of 19, I discovered yoga and it also saved my life. And I've talked about it on other, previous podcasts and stuff, but it's funny because we both went through this kind of coming of age into yoga and had it sounds like we both had very cathartic, very deeply somatic personal experiences in our yoga practice, although we didn't have language for it back then, right? We just this
Hmm.
mysterious, bizarre, why am I crying during this yoga class, right? This must mean that I have found the thing that's going to heal me, right? And, at the time that you and I met, I think we were still both pretty uncomfortable in those shadowy spaces that we
Oh,
didn't
yeah.
talk about this. We didn't realize that both of us were carrying this similar story about our relationship to yoga because we were both still kind of in it, in our patterns with it. And it just goes to show that, like, no matter how much you look outside yourself and think that other people like have it made or have it figured out, we have all been through something. We are all carrying shadows. We are all carrying darkness that most of us don't really know how to face, just like you and I didn't really know that there were practical, effective ways to face these things. We're just kind of swimming around in it. Like you said, it feels like this must just be what it is to like be alive, right? Because we don't have an alternative. And going back to that, what you said before, I've thought about this a lot recently. Growing up and being a child, we have no context for life. We have zero context to go on. We just have like this direct experience of whatever it is that we're experiencing that's coming in through our family lineage, through our culture, through all these different channels that we're being exposed to what it means to be a person, and a lot of times, our parents are just trying to get by themselves. And so there's a lot of suppression, conscious or unconscious, that we face as children with no context for that suppression. We don't even know why we're turning away from ourselves or turning away from our feelings, you know? And then there's this process that you described so beautifully of kind of realizing that you had unconsciously been turning away from yourself. And when you start to turn towards yourself, it's like this opening. As you said, I think right before we started recording, the scariest place, maybe I'll let you take off from here. Where's the scariest place on this journey?
I got goosebumps when you were talking. I was like, yes, yes, this is it, you know? Yeah, I like to say, and I talk about this with my clients as well when I do coaching, when I do readings. I do astrology. I use astrology and my own intuitive gifts as a tool when I do readings and coaching as well. So the scariest place to be is at the threshold. When the door has opened, you realize that, oh, okay, there's more that I need to do, or there's something I need to face. And when you're on the threshold, you still have that choice that you can back out or you can choose not to walk through that door. And what's beyond that door, that's the unknown, and that's why it's scary. So the scariest place to be is at the threshold before you make the decision to take that first step. The first step, I know it's a cliche to say, but the first step is absolutely the hardest one. And then from like after that, beyond that, it's all about having good tools and talking about somatic healing or somatic movement or, you know, we're energetic beings. So learning how to work with energy and what that actually means, moving energy through the body, through movement, and also having a support system. It doesn't have to be a village, it can be a person or maybe two people. Those things are important when we start to walk this journey. And I will say, you said something that gave me goosebumps all over when we start to turn towards ourselves. That's what it's about, because it's exactly this that creates our survival strategies and our survival. Now I'm talking about a little trauma therapy here, or trauma theory, because I think we have this picture um, what a trauma is. It has to be very extreme situations, like war or rape. And those are definitely trauma or can create trauma. But trauma is not, it's not about what happened, it's about what happened inside of you when something happened. And for example, you were talking about parents. If there's a pattern that repeats over and over again, for example, that a parent is not able to support you in your experience of life and help you make sense of it, that's a trauma because that creates a survival strategy.
Mm.
Like, okay, my experience of the world is obviously wrong because no one can confirm it. Therefore, I turn away from myself because I have to do that to survive. As a child, we have to do these things to survive and to still be accepted by our parents. It's very primal still, these processes. So our survival strategies are actually extremely intelligent
Mm.
and they had to be there at a certain point in life. But then when we grow up and become adults, those strategies are not necessary anymore and they become destructive in our lives.
Mm.
And that's when we start to recognize that that's happening. And that's all these patterns and these things we keep doing and we don't understand, like, why does it keep happening to me? Or why can't I change this thing? Or whatever that is. that's when we need to start to turn towards ourselves. And yeah, and that's the shadow work.
Yes, yes. And I mean, I was so blessed in the last year to have a shadow work guide that I did some of this stuff with. And so I really respect what you're up to because it's a powerful thing to allow someone to guide you in these processes. It takes a lot of kind of trust because
Mhm.
the stuff that you go back and find, it seems some of it's really painful and then some of it seems like sort of mundane and it's almost confusing. Like, why is this memory, this specific moment, in my childhood coming up, and why is it related to this visceral experience that I'm having in my body, this intense grief or this intense, pain or shame or fear, right? From this some sort of minuscule experience that like, why is it so heavily charged? And I think it really does come from the way that we experience things as children with our whole bodies. It's part of that direct experience, full body experience of something. So that explains why, children are afraid of the dark. And you don't meet a lot of adults that are afraid of the dark because we have a context for the dark. We know that it's going to be light again. We've seen that over and over. We know that there's probably really nothing behind the curtain over there because we've seen confirmed over and over throughout our lives that the room is empty unless you let somebody into it. It's all these things, right? That we are, or even if you are, tapping into the other worlds, even there are adults that are very comfortable with the dark because they know how to protect their energy, right? They know how to be comfortable with darkness. But as children, we don't really have ways to operate unless, as you said, we come up with coping patterns. And I love what you said. These coping patterns, these survival mechanisms are incredibly intelligent and they're there for our benefit. Even if they feel kind of twisted and yucky sometimes, there is something that our body intelligence, right, that our spirit, our body intelligence is doing to benefit us, to protect us, to help us survive, to keep us out of harm's way, right, to
Mhm.
help us get through to the next moment. Can you say a little bit about that, like some of the ways that our shadows help us?
Yes, definitely. So it's what I just said relating to trauma. It's definitely our bodies, our brains, our whole system is so intelligent. It's this whole system that operates, like I said, behind the scenes. We don't really do that consciously. And I think, it's almost like, so from a spiritual point of view, your soul chooses to come in, and there's nothing that is, and I know that this can be triggering for people, just a little, yeah, disclaimer on that, but everything is kind of designed perfectly for you to be on your journey and have the soul evolution that is actually the highest evolution and potential for you. I think of to be a human being is a huge privilege. It's such a blessing to be here from a soul perspective. It doesn't always feel like it from a human perspective, right? I like to look at Earth, this whole experience here, it's a school and it's full of polarity, right? And that's the whole point, is for us to understand polarity, to experience polarity, and also in our own very personal, intimate lives, So all the trauma, all the shadow, all of these things is actually an opportunity to expand massively and to evolve massively, not just in on a soul level, but in your own human experience in this life. So there's this quote by Joseph Campbell. That's one of my favorite quotes. And it goes, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." For me, this sums up shadow work and trauma work because the personal power, the freedom, the liberation, the clarity, the centeredness, the groundedness, and the ability to be, I know what I want. I know what my boundaries are. I know how to create the life that I want. I trust myself. I feel good in my body. All of these things that we are longing for, all the time. That's the treasure that is hidden in this
Mm.
work that is really about getting to know ourselves. That's what it's really about, know thyself. If we don't know where our triggers come from, if we don't understand why we get triggered by certain things, if we don't understand and know our own limiting beliefs, we have no way of changing it. There's no room for change to happen, right? So that's kind of how I see that the shadows can help us, you
Mm.
know?
Yeah, well, I
Because
think,
if everything was just handed to us on a silver plate, just imagine it for a moment that you came into this life and everything was just perfect. It's something about the magic that happens when you find that key that fits the lock, you know?
yeah.
That's we wouldn't be able to have those experiences of like, wow, potential possibilities, expansion, if it wasn't for how it's all designed in a way, you know?
Yes, and trusting what's happening, even within our own body, can be a difficult thing, especially when we don't have a lot of confidence. And, if we're coming from a place where we don't have a lot of confidence in our bodies and their ability to heal. I think that yoga is a place that a lot of people start when they're exploring, alternative ways of healing. And, what yoga does in so many ways is it helps you get in touch with that part of your body that is self-healing, that is self-restoring. And it
Yes.
can be a beautiful foundation. But what you're talking about here in terms of working with the patterns and the shadows that begin to emerge when you start listening, right? If yoga is the beginning of the conversation where you actually start hearing and noticing what's happening in your body, well, then how do you respond? Like, how do you respond to what your body's saying? And a lot of it is through, like you said, shadow work and bringing what is unconscious to the surface and then handling it skillfully. And in that, we can begin to develop a foundation for which our lives can actually be our lives and not just a series of stress patterns acting themselves out over and over again, where we actually feel some sense of volition or control over where our lives are going. And it's a tricky place because the truth is, when you kind of keep unwinding, you realize there's not that much control that we really have, right? But we do have just a small space of presence that's available in each moment that we can operate from more and more as we become more and more present. And that has a lot to do with being able to be our whole selves and not
Yes.
just be one part of ourselves. So we talked about this a little before, but you know, maybe you can just, because I'm sure that people are hearing this and they're still a little bit in their toxic positivity framework where they're like, really, is it really a good idea to go there? Because it's so much more comfortable for me to just be like, in my happy zone all the time, you know? So maybe you can share a little bit about like your journey with kind of the way that we chase the light so hard in yoga communities or in spiritual communities.
Yes, I mean, and I understand that fear or skepticism and the question of, is this really a good idea? I'm not here to tell people you have to do it because it has to be a genuine, authentic choice. And I think that's so important because as you start walking down that path, trying to go back is, there's something that happens when we face the truth. The way I see it, love is truth, truth is love. And when we see truth, we can't really turn away from it. It's almost impossible. And so the only choice is to keep going. I like to say it's like trying to get the toothpaste back in the toothpaste, little toothpaste thing. So I think it's healthy actually to take a moment and stop and say, okay, do I want this? Do I want the truth? Because
Mm,
that's what this is. That's what
yeah.
this is about. It's about facing the truth of who you really are. Earlier, you were saying something about searching outside of ourselves for the answers. I did that for so long and simultaneously, because usually when we're searching for the answers outside of ourselves, that means that we're at the same time running away from ourselves, right?
Mm,
It's like that's what happens because we don't think that we can go inside to find the answers. Because maybe every time we try to go inside, there's just so much noise. It's overwhelming to be there inside ourselves because there's just so much going on. So we start to search for that answer, that key outside of ourselves. And I kept doing that for so long. And it's such a energy drain. We spend so much energy running away from ourselves. It takes a lot of energy because your system is actually also intelligent enough to try to get you to see the things that are important to see. And that's also why these events keep happening again and again, and these patterns keep repeating. And when the universe is trying to poke you on the shoulder and say, hey, look at this. And that's not from malice, that's from kindness, that's from
Mm.
love. The universe is loving. It wants us to look at these things and understand. And then we keep running away because it's uncomfortable. And I kept doing that as well. So the moment I remember the moment. It was a moment. And I can tell the story. It was back in 2019. And I had been in a very serious relationship for years. And we were talking about taking the next step in the relationship, buying a house, maybe thinking about a baby. And that's like mentally where I was at. And then still to this day, I don't really know what happened, but he broke up with me anyway. And it was like, I don't know if you know tarot, but it was this tower moment. It was
Mm.
the lightning hitting
Mhm.
the tower, and I was free falling, and I was like, what just happened? I felt like all the security, everything that I knew was just ripped away from under my feet. And in that moment, I remember it well. I was sitting in the living room in my parents' apartment, which is like on the top floor looking out of the city. I was sitting there in this big chair with a glass of red wine that I had been drinking every day to numb my feelings, which is that was a pattern for me. I reached for alcohol to numb myself very often. And in that moment, I was like, okay, usually in these situations, what I do is I drink, I numb myself, and then I also don't really talk about my feelings to people. I don't really let anyone in. I just handle it on my own. And in that moment, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to do that this time because I'm tired. I'm so tired, and I don't think I can. I don't think I can do this on my own this time. And I closed my eyes and I remember the vision that I had is it was like, you're swimming on the surface of the ocean and it's just waves and waves and waves and you're trying to survive and you've just been doing that for so long. And then it's this moment of surrender where you just relax and you let yourself drop. And that's what I did in that moment. And it was so painful because I allowed myself to sink into all of those feelings and emotions that were there. And those weren't just about him and that relationship. That was all of the stuff that I hadn't
Mhm.
really handled. What happened in that moment, though, and I think this is the first time I had a connection with God. Like, I can't imagine that God would feel this is what God is, like there was all this pain, but then something, because I surrendered to it, something else also appeared there, like this huge container. And I felt so safe and I felt so held. And I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna really let go into this, and that I think that was my first experience of God. I didn't grow up in a religious home at all. I never had a relationship to that at all. So love, or that's the closest thing I can ex or way I can explain it, is it felt like love, like unconditional, universal, unconditional love. Everything had a place there. And that's where my shadow work journey started, because I was like,
Mhm.
okay, if that love is there, if that container can be there, then I can face anything. And that's also something that is very important when you start walking down this journey of radical self-honesty. is very important. And in order to face our truth, we have to practice self-love. We have to simultaneously, work on that container. Because the way I see it is like a universal, unconditional love. It does not judge. There is no judgment there. It's a container and it's strong and powerful and it can hold anything.
Mm.
So I do believe that that's extremely important as well. Yeah,
It's such a beautiful story. And I can just imagine that surrender and the way that just instead of all the things that are usually in the way of receiving that love, surrendering and just letting go of that, I need to control how this experience happens, and instead just allowing for a larger, that's a beautiful way you put it, a larger container to hold me in this. And
yes,
what you pointed to as well is that once we have experienced that, we can actually start to go there consciously. We can start to actually use certain tools and modalities to continue to build that spaciousness inside ourselves, because our consciousness really isn't an I. It's actually more of a we. Our spirit is not singular. It's actually kind of an entourage, if you kind of know what I mean, like where you actually, and people refer to it as guides, right? Sometimes when I've gotten really into like, geeking out on like microbiology and like just how 1% of our bodies is like, human DNA, and so much of us, our bodies are microbes. It's like maybe these little, microbes that are constantly shifting and changing and interacting with our nervous system and all of this stuff, perhaps they are part of what's holding me. They're part of the literal fabric of my body that's holding me and my consciousness together. And that if I can allow them to support my life and not think that I have to just do it all from my head and figure it out, right? But I can actually be in my whole body. Because I think a lot of us, we spend our lives, the first part of our lives, really, you know, in our head or like in our heart or in some, combination. But our entire system has wisdom. We talk now about like, there's people talking about womb wisdom. There's people talking about your gut, your gut wisdom. I mean, I think like our toes and our fingers and our bones, they all contain wisdom. They all contain life force energy. And that's the larger container that it sounds like you were actually able to tap into in that moment and know that even though it felt like it at times, you're never really alone. And when you recognize that, then it opens for other people to actually support you too, because you're like, I am supported. Let me reach out and call that person and share what's going on. You know, can you say a little bit about what kind of mentors or relationship you had with like teachers and mentorship, and how that kind of shifted after this experience in 2019? What kind of teachers and leaders were you looking for at that point?
yeah, definitely. I think in it to begin with, I was exploring a lot of this on my own. So in 2019, I was like, okay, the concept of shadow work was presented to me. I started listening to different types of podcasts. For anyone who knows anything about astrology, I'm a Scorpio. So I'm like, if I get obsessed with something, I need to get to the bottom of it? So I researched a lot and I also looked into like how can I practice this because not a lot of there wasn't a lot of information on how. I found a lot of information on what shadow work is, but not how to actually do it. What I did, and I got introduced to what you just mentioned, which is womb healing. Because after this breakup, I actually felt that I need to get away, like physically away from the space I was in. I was in Oslo and I was like, I need to physically get away. So I went to Bali and I signed up for this women's retreat that was also all about womb healing. And this woman, she was amazing. She was a priestess, goddess, I don't know, witch. She was an incredible older lady. And she guided us through every day through breathwork and womb healing. And this is the first time I was introduced to the concept of the womb and for women, the intelligence that is there. So the womb it's the void in a way, right? It's the first original thing that exists. It's the darkness. but it's also where life is created and where creation happens, you know? And if we can, as women, if we can sink down into our room and ask for guidance and ask for truth and ask for, information, we will receive. So I've definitely gotten a lot more in touch with, like you said, different parts of my body after I started doing shadow work. What happened then, a few years later, I actually started going into trauma therapy because I started reading a lot of books. Gabor Mate is amazing.
Mm.
I don't know if you know him.
Yeah.
Is that, yeah, because, trauma kept popping up into my sphere. And also as a yoga teacher, because what I noticed is I started to teach differently
Hmm.
as a yoga teacher because I was practicing differently. And then my students started to have different experiences, and things were starting to come up for them in my classes. They were having, this is what happens when we do somatic healing, because we can do healing through the body as well, just
Right.
physically moving in a special way, and you hit that special spot. Like it happened for me the first time when I started crying. That's, because trauma and all of these things, they're physically in the body. So if we hit the right spot, all of a sudden that can release and it comes up. And that started happening in my yoga classes. And I was like, okay, I'm not equipped to handle this. I don't know what to do when people are having their trauma surface in my class. I need to educate myself. So I started educating myself on trauma theory because I wanted to do that for the other people, for my students. And then the more I read, the more I started realizing that this is also about me, because I started seeing myself in so many things that I was reading. And that's when I decided to go into actual trauma therapy. And I found just an amazing, wonderful therapist. And I'm still in contact with her. She's amazing. And this is a form of therapy. It's called IOPT. I can send it to you so you can put it in the show notes. It's a system that works directly with our subconscious mind. So,
Mhm.
with traditional talk therapy, you try to get to the root cause of things by going through the mind,
The story
uh,
and the mental
the
work. Yeah.
story and the ego. And, that's why usually talk therapy can be amazing for certain purposes. But when it's about reprogramming yourself and getting to the root cause of something, for me personally, talk therapy has never ever done that for me, and I don't know anyone who's gotten there through traditional talk therapy. Or so this method, it goes the other way. It kind of bypasses the ego and the story completely, and you work in a way that goes directly into the different parts of you, the survival parts of you, the traumatized parts of you, the feelings, the emotions, and it's really about having a sit down with yourself. It's very powerful and very beautiful. So that also kind of propelled me further on this journey for sure, because that put things more into context. It was like a puzzle, like a huge puzzle that one piece at a time, it just fell into place. And, from what we were saying before, the scariest thing, place to be is on the threshold before you take the first step. And then it may be scary for a little while, but I can testify to where I am now. This is like a treasure hunt, because
Mm.
you get to observe how you change. You get to observe how your life changed when you start to peel off all of the layers that are not actually you. And you
Yeah.
start to get closer and closer to the authentic you. Things change. And I mean that in a very positive way.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
So now it's like I'm excited, I'm like, okay, what else? What else? I
Yeah.
all the pain and all the this is the funny thing when you face your trauma or you face your shadows. There's a moment of pain for sure. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. And there's a moment of release. But there's also this massive satisfaction that comes from finally understanding why things are the way they are.
Mm.
finally understanding yourself, finally seeing things and just with clarity, there's nothing more satisfying. And I would say this is what real personal freedom is
Yeah.
just being free, feeling free inside yourself and feeling whole and, mastering self-acceptance. Because this work will do that for you. If you do it the right way, you will get to a point where you're like, oh my God, I actually love myself and I feel like myself and I feel, yeah,
Well,
free.
and we get to feel then comfortable in the presence of others because we can see the humanness and, we can see the pain, but we can also see the wholeness. You can see the function within the pain. We can see the way that this person in front of us who maybe we were threatened by or intimidated by, or maybe, we were triggered by some way in the past. We see them differently now that we're not so loaded ourselves. We see them with so much more ease and compassion and acceptance for who they are. And then we get to be more comfortable in their presence. We get to
Yeah.
be able to look someone in the eye and just be ourselves and not try to hide something or obscure something or hide something in them, avoid something in them. There's a certain kind of honesty that we get to experience as a community with other people when we do this work, which is really powerful.
Can I add
Please go
something to
ahead.
that? Because what you're saying is so important. And I have experienced this. The way we are able to hold space for ourselves, that gets directly reflected in how we treat other people. So the more space and acceptance I can hold for myself, the more accepting I become for other people. And also, in addition to that, the more authentic I am, the more me, just me, I am, the more authentic relationships I will be able to build in my life.
Oh, hell yeah.
Because a relationship is just a mirror.
Yeah.
It shows you how you treat yourself, basically, and if I'm authentic in who I am, then I will meet people who are, and we will be able to together build something that's authentic and beautiful and also accepting of everyone. The goal is not that we should be the same, right? It's that each of us can be our whole unique, quirky human and come together and then create magic.
Yeah, yeah. And the mirror that you're describing, the way that our relationships are showing us, that is in its own way, its form of shadow work. Is like whatever's
Yes.
showing up in our relationship is a reflection of what we are or are not dealing with in ourselves. And it's kind of like how, we can tend to focus outward at first, but it always comes back to what we're doing with ourselves, because it's kind of like when you were trying to focus on how do I learn about trauma for the sake of my students, because this is coming up in my classes and I need to learn something for the sake of them. It started as this externalized thing that you were doing for others. And then as you got into it, you're like, oh, this is for me too. And what you begin to realize is that that's always how it is. Like the student and the teacher are one. If there's something that you're working on in your own life, in your practice, is there something you're working with inside of you, you're going to be able to bestow that just naturally to others, that acceptance, that level of awareness, right? In the same way as when you're working, you know, externally, trying to focus on helping other people, you're going to find things that are going to reflect back the work that needs to be done inside of you.
100%. And this is so important because I've always had this, ever since I was a little kid, I was like, I am supposed to be of service to people somehow. And I mean, I think I was to a certain extent also as a yoga teacher, but I am recognizing now that I tried to help people before I had helped myself. And that's what kept coming up, for me as a block or a blockage, or why can't I do this? Because I had to do that work for myself. I had to do that work inside of myself before I could start to do that work with and for other people. And that's
Yes.
so true. I mean, it's just that's it. That's what creates healers. It's like healers didn't just wake up one day and were like, "Oh, I'm a healer." True healers, they healed themselves, and then that's where that healing power comes from, to be able to help others do that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that I was thinking about some shadows that specifically used to come up for me when I was teaching yoga in a still highly traumatized state, which it was like unconscious. I didn't know that I was still in this highly traumatized state and, was teaching yoga. And absolutely, I was helping people. I was being of service. There were people who loved my yoga classes. But when I would have someone come up to me and bestow me or like offer me this praise and say, thank you so much. What a wonderful class. Oh, you're so amazing. There was like a blocker, like I couldn't receive
Mhm.
that love. I felt like it wasn't true. I had all these voices in my head that like denied that I was doing anything valuable, that immediately had like a comeback to tell me that I really wasn't that great, right? Like I could not receive that kind of a validation because I didn't feel like it was coming from this place of authenticity in me, my teaching. It was coming from a place of desire to help others. It was coming from a genuine place of love, but it didn't come from a place inside of me that felt whole. There was this wound that was still going on all the time that basically blocked any of that love from actually entering. And it's such a different experience now. And maybe you relate to this because when people offer me that praise and that love, I know that what I have given them, in a session has come from that place of having truly been with all of those same scary, dark feelings or pain that they experienced, right? And moving through it. And so I can receive that. I can receive that praise and I can receive that validation and I can let it feel good that I did something very helpful because I know now, I know that it was actually helpful. Whereas before, I'm like, I think this is helpful. I'm not experiencing being fully helped by this, but I guess you are, right?
Yes, I relate so much to what you're saying. And I think there's rejection of praise or love, it's also a rejection of ourselves. Again, it's a mirror. Are we able to receive love from ourselves? And it's also about authenticity because when you, like you say, like you've turned towards yourself, you've found your authentic self. And everything you bring from that place is authentic, right? So if we're bringing something to the world that is like maybe it's coming from a good place, good intentions, but it may be coming from a place where we're trying to fulfill some sort of outside expectation or something we think like this is how I should do it or this is what I should do. It's never going to feel authentic to us. And then that praise is not going to feel authentic, right? So, and that's also as we start to heal ourselves and you know, our shadows, our trauma, become so much more intimate with ourselves as well. We're able to give ourselves praise and we're able to know in our being what we're worth. And so when someone else mirrors that to us, it's easy to receive.
Yeah, yeah. And that self-validation is, I think, most of the time what we're actually seeking when we're looking for it outside. You know,
Yes.
we're looking for confirmation that our experience is real and it matters. And the
Yeah.
only person who can actually give that to us is ourselves. Granted, it's wonderful and beautiful to have, a coach or a teacher or someone be there with you in the process of reflecting that to the point that you can actually feel it in yourself, right? And kind of going back to that, the reason that I think talk therapy has its limitations is because being somatically aware in our bodies is like having certain pathways developed for actually receiving information from our system about what's happening and where we are and what it's like to be right now. And if we don't have those pathways developed and we're just trying to use the ones that we do have that are all about the story and are all about avoiding discomfort and are all about, figuring it out versus allowing the process to move through, right? Which is a totally different thing than figuring something out, right? Um,
Absolutely.
figuring things out, there's like this beginning, middle, and end, and you're trying to get through the middle so you can get to the outcome, versus being with the process is just allowing something that's natural to move through the motions until there's a natural conclusion. And we don't exactly know when that conclusion is going to occur, right? It's
Yes.
more nonlinear. And it's really
Yes,
more how
definitely.
healing happens. It's more how healing actually works than this linear thing. And
Mhm.
when we're doing talk therapy and we don't have those pathways developed, it's just limiting. But with what you described, the therapy that you went through that actually got you into the feelings and into the physical experience of what was going on in that story. Maybe the story was where you started, and then you drop into the experience of what it's like being right now. You start building those pathways. And as you said before, there's no turning back. We cannot put the toothpaste back in that tube. You have built
No.
these pathways, you have opened these doors, and now you're going to be receiving this information. A big
Yeah.
part of what I do now in my somatic work is building those pathways, like literally into different parts of people's bodies so they
Yeah.
can get all that feedback. And what I tell people, and you probably have experienced this too, is that now, even if you went into a talk therapy session, it would not be the same, because you would be a
Exactly.
somatic human being who is self-aware and connected to your internal experience going through that story, and your nervous system would do the somatic work required to move you through your natural process in that talk therapy session, which is maybe why talk therapy can be more effective for some people and much, much less effective for other people, depending on what you're walking in with, depending on what kind of pathways and connection you already have, right?
Definitely. I so agree with everything you're saying. And you said something about the story. And I have so many examples from my own life when I thought I knew why something was the way it was, or I thought I knew the story. I had the story. And then doing this work, everything we're talking about, and everything is connected, right? It's the mind, it's the energy body, it's the physical body. You can't really separate any of those. You have to work on different levels, you know, together. But when I started doing this work, I've had, it's almost like all your illusions start to crumble because you thought you knew, but you actually didn't know. Exactly. So the story changes. That's the
Mhm.
thing. And also the stories in and of it, some stories become very important. And you realize that other stories are actually not important. It's not the story that is important. It's not the figuring it out, as you say, because as long as we're trying to figure it out, we're stuck in the mind. And it's very limited what we can do from just the mind. And I do also think I agree with you that it's almost like the talk therapy is next level in a way, because if you have those pathways open and you have done work to reprogram yourself and you are self-aware, then maybe talk therapy can actually help you more.
Right. I think it could. I
Yes.
think that,
Yeah.
because the truth is that what we are talking about here today is becoming a whole integrated human. And
Hmm.
when you start to build those pathways to actually experience being a whole integrated person, you realize that so much of the processes that you go through don't really need that much outside assistance. They
Yes.
actually are an internal process that goes on in you. And then in many ways, like, you are always your own self healer, even when you're in the presence of a wise, teacher, or a powerful leader of some kind, or someone who's incredibly inspirational. It's still always you doing whatever you're doing with that information. Right. And so the more that you become this kind of self-contained human, then whatever kind of work you do is going to be more deeply impactful, right? I mean, I think about like the way
Definitely.
that I practice yoga now, with a sense of, awareness in my body that I simply didn't have before,
Hmm.
awareness of like where my limits are and where my edges are. And in some ways, I had to learn by pushing past them over and over. That was part of the learning, right? That's how we figure out where our boundaries are, is by crossing them and having them crossed. and then at a certain point, we learn where it is that we begin and others end. And that, again, is a process that involves, as you mentioned before, this shadow work, this actually digging into what is it that keeps me from knowing where I end.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you speak a little bit as someone, you described yourself, I don't know if you connect with this word, but empathic or sensitive, someone who feels into other people's feelings, that maybe feels
Mhm.
into collective energy. How has being more connected to your body through shadow work helped you as someone who's highly sensitive?
Oh, immensely, I can say. I think I was born psychic. I was a very intuitive child. I was back to what you were saying before. I was extremely afraid of the dark. And because as soon as it was dark, I started to see things and experience things. And I think I understood very early on that I experienced the world differently than other people. Obviously, I see and feel things that other people don't because no one is talking about it, no one is confirming it. And so slowly I started to shut that off. I
Mm.
worked very hard to shut it off because it was so uncomfortable. And I was so afraid all the time because I kept having these experiences, right? Which is something I'm also very passionate about to help people to start to open these channels again. Because I believe that we usually talk about psychic gifts or intuitive gifts as exactly that, gifts, like as if some people are gifted and others are not. That's not the truth of it. Everyone has the ability to develop these gifts. And when we know how to use them, they truly are gifts. But when we don't know how to use them or handle them, it becomes extremely chaotic, as it was for me when I was younger. So when people talk about, for example, channeling, you can have a channeler and they're channeling information. We tend to think about that as something going from the head and up, out here. I used to think about it that way as well. But the channel, if we're going to talk about the channel, that's here, or people can't see me, but that's from your crown all the way through your spine or the center of your body down to your root. It's through your energetic system. That's your channel. That's actually where you have to be in order to develop your intuition, develop any sort of gifts. You have to be grounded and fully present in your body. That's
Mm.
where it happens. That's where it happens because your body, the way you experience it as physical and dense, that's just a tiny part of the story. Your body is much more than that. Your body is energetic. So for me, when I started to ground down into myself, and let me just say this, if you haven't done any work to clear out trauma and shadow, it's going to be very difficult for you to be present in your body. That's the thing you're going to face first. So you have to kind of release that and work through that. And then it becomes much, much more easy to be present and to be grounded and to be centered in your body. So that's actually when I started to learn how to protect my energy field and how to do that. It happens from my channel, from my body. And that's also when my gifts started to come back online, right? Because again, the body and our whole system is so intelligent, it does everything it can. And the ego is also included into that. The ego is also there to protect you,
Mm.
right? And everything is there to protect you. So when I started to connect to this and I started to clear some trauma and I started to become grounded in my body, that's when it was safe for me and my body, my system to start to open up these channels again and start to receive that information again that I did as a child, but I had no, I couldn't handle it. I couldn't
Mm.
handle that back then. So that's been an amazing experience of like, oh my God, I'm safe. Okay, that's
Yeah,
great.
I
And
love that.
actually, yes, and actually, you said before, a lot of children are afraid of the dark, and as we grow up, we're not afraid of the dark anymore. I'm one of those people. I've always been so afraid of the dark ever since I was a kid. And when I started doing this work, I'm not afraid of the dark anymore at all. So I almost like to see that as what you call it, an analogy or like an analogy for I was afraid of my own dark and then I faced it and I
Yeah.
integrated everything and now I'm not afraid of the dark anymore.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you describe, the channel and you're basically pointing when, in so many ways to our central nervous system,
Yes,
and our central nervous system is branching out into our peripheral nervous system and going into all of our fingers and toes. But it's not just like these funny little tubes. They're full of energy and fluid and life force and beingness, neural
exactly.
connectivity. And so it's very much an alive process. And so think about it. If you are disconnected from different parts of your body and you're simply living in your head or living in, your head and maybe sometimes visiting your heart and maybe occasionally visiting your genitals, like you're just occasionally visiting these other areas, but you're not connected, your proprioceptive awareness of your body is limited, right?
Mhm.
Of course, you're going to be afraid of the dark. You don't know where anything is. If you
No,
start feeling your way around, there's going to be a lack of, knowing where the end of your body is and where things are around you,
yes,
but that comfort in being in the darkness comes from like knowing where you are,
yeah,
right? Knowing where you
definitely.
are. And that is a physical experience. It is physical and energetic, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
we start to you're describing this intuitive nature that is available to all of us when we start to connect with it again, when we start to cultivate it. And it does give you this like sixth sense of like
yeah,
knowing, right, you can feel the energy shift in a room. You can, and what you're feeling is collective energy. You're feeling other people's nervous systems shifting. Maybe you're even picking up on mental patterns or emotional patterns that are going on with people, and you feel it in your body, right? Because that's how we feel things. We feel things through our body. Maybe you feel it in your fingers or your toes, or you feel it, in your throat. And it's this is the right time to speak. All of that information starts to come in when we are clear, when we're not clogged up with everything that ever happened, right? And
yes.
so I love this conversation. I'm so inspired by where you're at right now and what you're up to, and I can feel your passion about all of this work. How do you work with people? Do you mostly work with people one-on-one, or are you designing different kinds of offerings?
Yeah, so right now I'm doing readings for people. So that, like I said before, I use my own, intuition and astrology in my readings. So astrology is a beautiful tool. The kind of astrology I use is what is called evolutionary astrology. So it's not as some traditional astrology wants to put you in a box, kind of a little bit. This is how you are, you know? I don't like that. I like to look at potential and I like to look at shadow. So that's what I'm doing in my readings. I use it as a tool in the readings. And really, astrology is a really good starting point for anyone looking for to understand themselves better. And then from there, I also take coaching. And that's where we work, you know, with the shadow and do shadow work and actually get into the how to do it. So astrology for understanding your blueprint basically and your makeup and your potential and your I don't like the word block because I don't think we're ever blocked, but it can feel like that anyway, like stuff we're bumping up against that we can't really make sense of. And then coaching to work from there. Yeah. And I'm also actually currently, so I've been studying digital marketing over to something completely different, but I'm currently very passionate because I've always thought that what if business savvy people, all the business savvy people, the successful people were into spirituality and yoga and the world would be a much better place. I've run my own business previously and now I'm into to digital marketing because I want to help people with conscious businesses, people who have spiritual practices, people who do these like wholesome, health focused practices and have these offerings. I want to help them have a reach and to be seen. because I believe that that's going to make the world a better place. So I want to help all the spiritual people like me
Mm.
to do this, to actually create that business and be successful and know how to bring that knowledge and all that experience out to the people who need it. Because I remember when I wanted to do this on my own, after I had my yoga studio, I had my brick and mortar business, I wanted to create my own online business. And I felt like I have so much knowledge and so much wisdom that I want to share, but I had no idea how to do that, right? So I'm kind of tr right now working on tying everything together so that I can do both. And yeah, that's also something I'm very passionate about at the moment. So there's
Mm,
going to be more offerings as well, like group coaching things.
awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I mean, I love that. I think that there's a lot of people out there that are, wanting to do entrepreneurship because
Yes.
they realize that they can make an impact in a way that they may not be able to working for somebody else. Not only an impact in their own lives, but that they get to actually attract the client who really wants to work with them, And I think that you'll be very successful at blending these things together. And yeah, and I'm excited to support you on this new venture and this new journey because you're right. The more that we can have like action, and this goes, not just, I mean, obviously men too, but women, spiritual entrepreneur women who
Yeah.
are killing it and making money, we share with other people and we improve the world
Yes.
through having access to influence and money. I truly believe that. I mean, I've seen it with my own eyes. And I know that as I've been building my business and rising and what I'm doing, I am more than happy to support other people, like through this podcast is one way that I do that, but also through different collaborations. As I am able to build my wealth more, I'm excited about the point where I get to make, a nice big donation to a cause or, help finance someone's dream. Those are things I really want to do. And I think I'm not the only one out there. And that is incredibly refreshing because that's not what the world of money has looked like for the last, couple hundred years. And it's just now burgeoning. It's just now starting to look different. And I'm excited for that.
I'm so excited for that. And I totally agree with you. And I believe that, we're made to believe that it's so hard, it's so difficult. You have to have all these skills. You need some skills, but it's actually pretty simple when you understand how it works. And we have so many possibilities now with social media and everything that goes within digital marketing. It's just about, again, to find that key to unlock how you actually do it. And I want to simplify it and streamline it so that more people can learn how to do this and be successful, like you say, because we need more people, especially women. I'm very passionate about that as well. Entrepreneurs who have that exact mindset that you have. We want to share and we want to be part of something that's bigger than us and we want to be of service and I think that's part of how we change the world for the better.
Oh,
I'm
absolutely.
very excited that that's happening now and yeah, to be able to be part of that, everything.
Yeah. Oh, that's so great. So tell our listeners where they can find you, where they can find more information, where they can follow you and keep a lookout for all of these beautiful offerings.
Yes, so my main account on Instagram, that's where I do most of my things. That's Maja Grythe. So we can write that in the show notes. I know it's a difficult name to pronounce. And I'm also working on, I just opened an account for specifically my readings and my coaching. So you can find me there. That one is called It's Magic by Maya. So that's completely new, but very exciting to do that. And then, yeah, that's basically where people can find me and just DM me and follow along on the
Beautiful.
journey. Yeah.
Yeah, well, definitely check out what Maya has to offer. I'm so happy and thrilled to see just this clarity in your eyes. And honestly, you're such a compelling speaker. And I don't think that I ever really witnessed you that way before because you were, kind of locked up a little bit. I mean, I was at the time too. for sure. But I
Yeah,
can really
definitely.
hear just how much flow you're experiencing in the way that you express and speak. It's very inspiring. It's very wonderful to
Oh,
get to see that evolution of your spirit.
thank you so much. And I could say exactly the same thing to you because, yeah, I feel the same way. And yeah, that's what happens, when we free ourselves and we're able to just be ourselves. It's so beautiful. And I'm so happy that we got to reconnect like this. That's so exciting. I feel like we've walked similar paths. We've had similar experiences, and it's so cool to reconnect like this so many years after.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well,
Thank you so much for having me. This has
oh,
been such a beautiful conversation.
absolutely loved it. Loved every moment of it. And I can't wait to chat more and maybe have you on the show later on when you've got some, further developments in your project and just hear how things are going.
I would love to.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Free Your Soma podcast. To find out more information about today's guest, check the show notes. And to find out more information about me, Amy Takaya, and the Radiance program, visit www.freeyoursoma.com. Hey there, truth seeker, freedom lover, consciousness expander. You've been listening to the Free Your Soma podcast. I'm Amy Takaya, and I'd like to invite you on the somatic exploration of a lifetime. Join me for Revive, a 9-week somatic movement adventure. You and an intrepid group of heart-led leaders will learn how to release muscular stress, tension, and pain, and how to come back to ease and flow in your body. What's more, this tension you've been holding in your back, your neck, your shoulders, this represents your untapped somatic potential. When these muscles lengthen out and relax, you will get to experience deeper body intelligence and wisdom throughout your life. Learn more about Revive at www.freeyoursoma.com.